Welcome, everyone. Welcome back for those that attended yesterday, and hello to those that are new to these sessions. We're very excited to have you and have day two to wrap up this series on MFA orientations and particularly how to apply to an MFA program. For those that are new to this session, if you don't know Itiola's biography is on our website, and it's also on the SprinNG website for you to read. If you go to spring.org/events, you'll find our information there. And we're also going to send follow-ups to you for you to connect with her further on social media to follow her if you're interested in reading more about her works and also just keeping up with whatever it is she does literary-wise.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. It's morning over here. I am really excited for us to get into this, the work. I'm going to show you all a few examples of things, and we're going to talk about the F1 visa process, how to ask questions once you get accepted to a program, how to advocate for yourself, etc. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you, Oyinda. Let's see here. Screen share. Yes. Okay. So part two. So a quick recap of part one. We discussed funding, location, faculty, as well as whether or not you want to stay in the city after your MFA, as decisions in choosing your program, as well as, of course, the kind of support that you would get from the program. In addition to that, we discussed approaching recommenders in your statement of purpose and getting all that together as soon as possible. We also discussed having a solid list of a minimum of 6 programs to apply to and joining the MFA group chat. Now we're going to continue on with the rest of everything. So statement of purpose samples. So what I'm going to do real quick is actually stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share for you all. A few of my colleagues have been extremely gracious enough to offer me some of their own statement of purposes. The reason why I didn't put it directly into the lecture is because your statement of purpose is not going to look like mine or look like other people's, because your journey into writing is very uniquely different. And that's the part about the statement of purpose. You want it to feel you want it to have a blend between it feeling professional as well as it feeling like it personal, right? Again, the statement of purpose functions such that you want us to get a sense of what your journey as a writer has been up until this point. So give me one moment. I'm going to find, I'm going to show you statement of purposes and also writing samples as well. When I was applying for my MFA, my kind of journey into getting my second MFA was a bit more difficult because when I left my first program, I did graduate, but I didn't formally turn in my thesis. So they refused to give me my diploma as a result. And I had a very difficult time with my first MFA program, which is why I didn't turn in my thesis. And if you all want to know about that, we can talk about that more towards the end. But what is important for you all to know is I had to talk about that, of course, in my statement of purpose. So this is my statement of purpose that I used for University of Mississippi, and I'm also going to show you the one that I had for Madison because they're a little bit different. So I began my first sentence by saying, I'm writing to express my interest in being a candidate for the University of Mississippi Masters of the Fine Arts program, right? The first sentence, you usually just kind of want to state out loud what your interest is, why you're applying for this specific program. That way the committee has a sense of, you're applying to the right program. And then in the succeeding paragraph, it's really important for you to talk about how your writing journey began and how the reading that you have done, how your literary lineage has informed you as a poet as well as a person. I began to take writing seriously in that I knew this was a lifelong commitment during my undergraduate career at Cal State University, Northridge, a program that provided me with passionate teachers and rigors and a wonderful graduating class who informed much of my work. And then later in the paragraph, I talk about the poet W.B. Yeats, who at the time was really integral to my writing philosophy. And then I said from his essay, The Symbolism of Poetry, which if you all have time at a later time, I would highly suggest you look up that essay on your own and read it. You don't have to quote the exact essay I did, but having that sort of contextualization from other poets allowed the committee to see what kind of writer I was and what kind of writer I saw myself as in the world. So the quote that I used was, because an emotion does not exist, nor does become perceptible and active among us till it has found its expression in color or in sound or in form or in all of these. And because no two modulations or arrangements of these evoke the same emotion, poets and painters and musicians, and in a less degree, because their effects are momentarily, day and night, cloud and shadow, are continually making and unmaking mankind. There's a lot of fancy ways to say that the way that poets move and think about the world constantly shapes our perception of our society, of our culture, and by virtue our personhood, right? And by having that precedent set at the very beginning, it allows the committee to see, this is how I think about poetry, this is how I think about writing as a whole, and this is how I think about my responsibility as an artist in the world. And then as the paragraph continues, I further contextualize. In this way, Yeats' essay gives context of how I approach the page. It was here that I began to learn how to ask the real questions. Who do I write for? Why do I write? What is my intention on the page? What other works is my poetry in conversation with? And I think that question is really important, even if you don't ask it so explicitly in your own statement of purpose. I think asking yourself, what other works is my poetry in conversation with? Being mindful again about your lineage is really important to help not only you expand your range as a writer, but it also allows the committee to understand how you draw from other folks to have your own unique entryway into writing. And then later I quote James Baldwin's necessary essay, The Creative Process, another really great, amazing, critical essay that I think would be really good just for you to just read if you are serious about being a writer long term. And then later here in the statement of purpose, I talk about the poets that have been integral to my growth as a writer. And then I segue into my own writing itself. My work is in the direct lineage of Audre Lorde and Lisa Clifton. My work is heavily inspired by Ada Solis Germay, Edward Hirsch, Anne Sexton, Jericho Brown, James Laugenbach, Rainer Maria Rilke, Amy Kwan Berry, Tracy K. Smith, Nicole Seeley, Exis Temple, Henry Dumas, and much more. Poets whose work continually makes and unmakes me. So that was really intentional. I used the Yeats quote back in the essay, back in my statement of purpose again. So that way the committee knows that I'm not just quoting Yeats just to look smart, but I understand what he is saying in his language and how that language is applicable to my own writing philosophy. I am a poet of witness. I move through the world with a noble eye to translate what passes through me into the tangible. I am an architect and a historian. And then here's the part where I segue and talk about my own writing. I am reimagining Cain and Abel as sisters in a restorative measure to place women at the forefront of history where we always belonged, right? So then I talk about my educational history before then, right? Before I got here. Now, I know that many of you are coming from a science background or non-English or non-art background. I think for that, you can still talk about your science background and experience, and then talk about how being in another field has uniquely positioned you to be able to not only be a poet or be a writer in the world, but also thrive and be successful in that way, right? I think if anything, being in other majors gives you unique insight that your other peers just don't have. And you have the opportunity to play up your other experiences and show to the committee how those experiences are transferable. So because, let's see here. Also because my experience was that I had a very difficult time with my first program, I had to mention it, of course. And I think it's really important to just be honest in your statement of purpose. But what I mean is that I'm not suggesting that you would be dishonest, but what I mean is that if there's anything in your academic past that you believe might get in the way of you being considered a viable candidate, just be honest and mention that in your statement of purpose. It's best to set the precedent early on and just be honest about maybe those concerns instead of maybe trying to maybe talk around it or not mention it at all. Um, so I talked about my desire to be awarded the teaching assistantship, which specifically for the University of Mississippi, Oxford, they required it being mentioned in their statement of purpose. My interests have evolved more toward the administrative aspects of poetics, working with organizations to procure funds and resources to provide artists with financial support. And for that reason, I would like the fellowship to support me financially as I continue to learn and work. So when I was coming into my programs, I knew that I didn't want to teach as a lifelong career. I knew that whatever I wanted to do was going to be in programming in some way, but especially I was really interested in making sure that artists get paid. And that is still true, obviously. And so I use all of that to better shape who I am, not only as a poet, but also as a literary citizen. How is the work that I'm doing in the world going to better my peers, but also everyone around me? And I think having that sense of community mentioned in your statement of purpose is really important. And then I talk about how my first program lied to me about funding. And actually, because my first program, I won't mention them, but because my previous program was dishonest about funding, that is a big part of the reason why I put together this lecture, because I will not let anyone else go through what I have been through. So I just said out loud that I just said up front that this is what happened to me and I want to start clean, right? So then I keep talking about my experiences. And then also one thing I think is really important is that I mentioned specific things the program offers, which is why I want to be admitted here. In terms of the curriculum, some of the options University of Mississippi provides for its students, which I'm very excited about, are the pre-1800 literature courses as it focuses on Haitian Revolution. The workshop, notably how professors such as Professor Amy Nzuku-Matatil gives her students space and time to write a new poem in workshop, and how Dr. Harrell, from my understanding, gives students packets of poems to give them a broad range of exposure, as well as a list of 30 books, which is required between the second and third year in the graduate program to demonstrate both the breadth and the depth of the field. I'm interested in the option of independent study, which would give me even that much more room to explore critical theory, tropes, and ideas which are conducive to my writing. So the reason why all the specificity is important is that you want to show or demonstrate to the committee that you've done your research extensively on the program and that you are not applying to this program lightly. You understand the commitment that comes with this master's program. And mentioning specific things that the program offers, I think is really important. And it's a really great way to demonstrate that you are a serious candidate, right? And then I mentioned here the poets that I have worked with in the past who have been really amazing to me and important to my own growth as a person and as a writer. And then I say the reason why I'm applying for the program and the reason why right now this is the program I should be in. Yet my education is not complete until I've graduated from an institution that has invested in me as much as I seek to invest in them. After speaking at length with my colleagues currently in the program, I feel very confident that the University of Mississippi is exactly where I need to be in order to flourish, in order to reach my full potential. Attached with this application are a number of poems which reimagines Cain and Abel as sisters, poems which are a series of self-portraits as misnamings and other works. Thank you so much for your time and your labor, and I look forward. So in my writing sample, my chapbook didn't exist yet, so I had poems from my full length, Blood Mercy, and I had poems from my chapbook, Spells of My Name, all mixed in together. And we're going to talk also about what makes a strong writing sample, because that's also really important as well. So that is the first writing sample. What I want to do now is show you a writing sample from my peers who were nice enough to offer their information as well. One of my colleagues got into Northwestern here in Chicago, and Northwestern has different qualifications that you have to account for in your statement of purpose. The reason why I'm showing this to you is because I want you all to kind of see what different statement of purposes do, right? especially because my colleague's statement of purpose was for an MA and an MFA. In the event that that's something that's of use to you, I just want you all to show you all that there are options, right? So again, the same kind of thing, right? The first paragraph talks about the poet's first entry into writing, how their background positioned them to become a writer, right? Um, and in the case of this specific candidate, I was raised by my Palestinian grandmother, 2 countries beyond herself, who had an 8th grade equivalent education, right? And then we keep going. And then years later, my mother would say that her first word was apple, pronounced apple. Though I fear she misinterpreted, perhaps that she mistook apple for Abba, father. My first word was a mistranslation, neither English nor Arabic. My first language was the space between, right? And then as we go through the statement of purpose, the poet then talks about how their lived experience has led them to this moment in poetry, right? I do not consider poetry autobiographical, but a formal disembodiment thereof. What spaces and timelines can my queer Palestinian poetic inhabit when memory is the site of desecration? These reckonings led to my obsession with poetic form as a disembodiment of non-linearities in lived and ancestral memory, a mode I aim to develop further in my time at Northwestern. Something that I think is never really mentioned enough in these conversations is that I believe that committees want applicants who are confident, who believe in their own work, right? In my statement of purpose and in this candidate statement of purpose, we're already talking as if the program is going to say yes to us, or as though what we are writing and dreaming of in our writing is something that the program will be very interested in. The applicant isn't even in yet, but they say, I aim to develop further in my time at Northwestern. And I think having that sense of confidence is really key to making your application stand out. And then they mentioned specific poets, right? And I think that's also really important too. Because of the imaginative spaces in my poetics occupies, I'm excited by the potential to work with faculty such as Chris Abani and Natasha Trethewey, whose poems have shaped my works, thinking on exile and history, and Sharif Shanahan, whose work has been informative to my own reckoning with homophobia and Swana colonial violence. My experience as a Kundiman Fellow and a Rari board member has taught me the importance of studying among poets who challenge and uplift my work and the lineages carried therein. Additionally, Litowit's unique MA plus MFA structure would also give me the literary criticism background that would be instrumental to my career goals within academia, either in literature or alongside my computation and engineering background in digital humanities. This is another reason why I wanted to show you all this specific statement of purpose, because my colleague did not come from an English major background. They actually were studying to be a scientist. They were actually at an Ivy League program studying to be a scientist, and then they made a very sharp left turn into writing. And here's an example in which they mention their past that's not necessarily related to English, but they weave it into their experiences to show I do come from multiple backgrounds, but because I come from different backgrounds, I am uniquely qualified as a viable candidate. And then the exact reason why you are applying for the program. You can do it probably sooner in your statement of purpose if you want. I often put it at the end, but it's really important for you to mention, I'm applying to this program because the timing in which I am applying to this program is paramount because, right? I'm at the crux of my learning and I have confidence that I will flourish in this environment because, right? You want to show the committee that you have a sense of self that will translate into you not only being a great candidate, but a great master's student, a great teacher, someone who will foster community within the program. All of those things I think are really important to the statement of purpose really being strong and standing out. I'm applying to Northwestern University from a terrifying yet exciting nexus, transitioning out of my bioengineering program at Harvard to study poetry more rigorously. I entered Harvard wanting to use my mathematics background to study by assigning language to the science of memory. I know now that my work must engage with memory in a more intimate capacity, which an academic path in science cannot provide. And then specifically for this applicant, they were required to write a diversity statement. Most programs don't. I unfortunately do not have an example of a diversity statement. So pardons for that. Throughout this journey, poetry has been my revitalizing force. Through daily readings, cross-country road trips to poetry slams, and every impossibly miraculous late-night conversation with writers who've been my chosen family, my literary community has kept me grounded in my most difficult moments, right? And again, I keep mentioning community, and I have to say it again, but I do think that community in some way should be mentioned in your statement of purpose, right? And when I define community, it could even be your peers that you have a group chat with, where all of you kind of get together once a week and write poems, right? How do you foster community in your most intimate spaces, and how does that translate into the kind of poet that you are? I am of the personal belief that in order to be a good poet, writing is as important too, but also being a literary citizen is important too, right? I think often about my own Western privilege, and I think like, what could I do to better clear the path for my peers so that way they can be put in the best position for success. And if there's any way that you can mention that in your statement, the more the better. And then when we get to the end here, they talk about their debut collection, and writing and teaching and writing literature and publishing at Emerson College has given poetry a new central role in my life, and has ultimately led me here, hoping to build a better future for the whole of myself and my interests at Northwestern University. Yeah, so like I said before, one thing about why the statement of purpose is so strong and so successful is because the candidate mentions specific things in the program that makes the committee see, okay, because we offer this, the candidate will really get the things that they need, right? It's really important for you to say, because the program offers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 things that I need to flourish as a writer, I believe that I would be a very strong candidate for this program. I have confidence in my abilities here because I know that this program will offer me the tools that I need, not only to thrive in the program now, but also my long-term success once I graduate. Something else I probably didn't mention is that it's really important to talk about the fact that, why the program, I'm so sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's really also important to talk about why you want to be a part of the community that the program is fostering. All of those things will really be good too. Let's see here. So statement of purpose. Now I want us to look at writing samples. Again, because okay. Let's look at one more statement of purpose. This is the one that I did for University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I want to kind of show you how I kind of did them both differently. Same kind of beginning, right? Talked about, the symbolism of poetry. We talked about Yeats and all of that. And then I talked about my experience with why I'm reapplying for an MFA. And then I talked about my experience at my first MFA and why it was so important. Like the committee does not need to know that my experience was difficult, but they do need to know that I learned something about myself and I learned how to advocate for myself, right? And I think that was really important. And then I mentioned at the end my writing sample, etc. So now we're going to look at writing samples real quick. I'll show you mine, and then I will show you the one that my peers have also offered to share with me. Give me one. Oh, and another thing I want to show you all is the CV. I didn't put it in my lecture because I actually forgot. But then right as I was putting together the materials, I found my old CV. And I think that because a lot of people don't know how to put together a curriculum vitae, which is essentially like an extended resume that incorporates all your art experience or all your poetry adjacent or writing adjacent experience, right? So actually, sorry, before we actually look at the writing sample, I wanted to actually go back to the slideshow. One moment. So we talked about the statement of purpose samples, right? Um, and then we talked about we'll come back to sealed transcripts. Let me actually talk about the sealed transcripts first, actually. So the sealed transcripts are the completed semesters in which your final grades have been sealed, so the applicant cannot tamper with them. At least when I was applying, someone had to sign over the envelope flap to confirm it was not tampered with, but many things have changed since then. I believe you have to give the school at least 2 weeks notice. I imagine in different parts of the world, you probably have to do much sooner than 2 weeks notice. So maybe I would recommend, if at all possible, maybe if you can give a month or a month and a half notice. I imagine the sooner that you ask, the sooner you'll be able to get your official transcripts in order to get them sealed. For the initial process of applying for the MFA, most programs will just ask for your unofficial transcripts, but you do eventually have to send them the official transcripts. In my experience, I know that peers have been rejected from programs because they were unable to offer their official transcripts or explain why they couldn't. So this is something that's supplemental application material, a critical sample. Sometimes if you're applying to an MFA that has a literary component, they will ask you to write a critical sample. And a critical sample usually is some kind of essay, but it's more so an essay that has more of a literary criticism component to it. So for example, The Creative Process by James Baldwin is an example of a critical sample. W.B. Yeats, in my statement of purpose that I mentioned, is another example of what would be considered a critical sample, right? This isn't a requirement for every MFA, but it is for most MFAs that also have a specific literature component if the MFA is an MFA that also goes into a doctorate program. So, okay, now the poetry sample. So the writing sample, I would say, is the most important part of your application. The entire application is important. Everything we talk about is important, but also this has to be the strongest part of your application, right? There are different ways you can approach what kinds of poems you put into your sample, but here are some things to consider. You want a poetry sample that shows your range of technique, style, and abilities as a writer. They don't have to, but I found it helps to have poems that have a sense of order to them. You want poems to demonstrate a link to your literary lineage as stated in your statement of purpose, right? You also want poems that demonstrate you are a deliberate thinker and writer who is conscious about their choices, syntax, form, lyrical movement, line breaks, enjambments, etc., right? Please note also the poems do not have to be previously published unless they explicitly state otherwise. But most MFAs know that folks who are applying probably have never ever published anything. It probably helps to have something published, but I think that most MFAs do not hold that against an applicant if they've never published before. Like I said, in my program, almost with the exception of like 3 of us, almost half of my cohort had never published anything before the program. And then they published after they left, right? But whatever you offer up to the committee, it has to be your very best work to date. All right, now we're going to get into the poetry sample packets. I jumped the gun because I was a little too excited. So I'm going to show you all my writing sample, which now that I'm like 4 years divorced from this thing, it's very cringe to look at. But if you all get something out of it, then it was all worth it, right? I did a very bold thing where I began with a prose poem. There's nothing wrong with starting with prose poems. I just know that sometimes people have an aversion to them because of their own, biases, right? So what I did is that I started with I had a writing sample that had a clear sense of an arc to it. And so for that, it was really important for me to begin with a poem that talked about why we were doing this sort of gender bending, fable reimagining. And then we go to, the next poems that are here. A lot of these poems are very old looking to me, but it's also really important that they look visually different on the page, I think at least. Also consider this, right? The committee is going to be looking at hundreds of applications, right? You want your poems to really stand out, both visually, syntactically, and stylistically, right? So I had poems that were doing stuff like this on the page, for example. I had poems that looked like this as well. I had poems that were doing, whatever is going on here. This poem as well. And so, it's 10 pages that are often required. I think some programs ask for more, but my understanding is that most programs will only ask for 10 pages. But please note two things, right? 10 pages is not always 10 poems. You might have one poem that's 10 pages long, or you might have two poems that are 5 pages long, right? Whatever you do, put your very strongest poems, I would say, in the first, your strongest poem should begin and end begin and end your sample, right? And then everything else should kind of fill out from there. Okay, I'm going to show you now one of my peers writing samples too. That way you all can kind of see how, there's no such thing. There's no one rule about what looks like a perfect writing sample, right? But it's good to have an idea of what different ones look like. That way you can understand what I mean when I say range. So here is my peer's writing sample as well. Also something I will say is that some of the poems are redacted because my peer asked for some of their privacy to be considered. So if you see like large blocks of redaction, it's not a poem, it's the poem itself is redacted. As you can see, a lot of these poems are also very visually different, right? We have these poems that are in tercets here, but then we have this whole large prose block right here, right? And then we go back to, ooh. And then we go back to this poem that kind of goes from right to left. Okay. Oh yes, one last thing I really wanted to show you all. Give me a second here. So a CV is a curriculum vitae, as I mentioned before. A curriculum vitae is essentially your resume that it's extended with an art component. And I wish I had remembered to put this in my my lecture, but it's fine. I can show you all my CV. With your CV, it's really important to put all of your best publishing experience, any readings that you have done, anything that will help make you stand out as a viable candidate. Let's see here. So this is what my CV looks like, right? I have like 5 CVs, honestly, but I always encourage you all to have one master CV that you copy and paste and tailor to different programs or tailor to different jobs or anything else that requires it, right? I recently applied for a poet in residence position that I did not get, but I was a finalist for it. And in the feedback letter from the committee, they told me that I should have added my teaching experience. Again, I know that many of you do not have teaching experience, which is totally fine. But if you happen to have any kind of teaching experience, even if it's not necessarily in English, it doesn't hurt to put it on your CV. So one thing I did not put in my header is where I'm coming from in the world. So I would put maybe, whatever province you're in, whatever country you're coming from, right under your name. And then I put my education up to that point. I put all of the fellowships that I had done up until that point, and all of my work experience that is relevant to applying to the program. So I've hosted my own workshops. I was a director of an art organization. I was an editor and a grant writer for a nonprofit magazine. I was a bookseller. I worked at Poets House for a little bit. And I did a bunch of teaching and other facilitating as well. And here are all of my readings that I had done up until that point, right? Your CV can be more than one page. I don't know if you all have heard this, at least in my experience. People usually say when you're applying for something, you don't want your resume to be over a page. The CV is not like that. It's important that you put everything as possible in there. So if your CV goes past 5 pages, unless the program explicitly says so, it's totally fine. So now I want for us to kind of go into talking about the F1 visa process. This will be brief only because most of the information that I have is secondhand from my peers who were extremely gracious enough to offer their experiences so I could offer them to you, right? As many of you know, I was born here in the States, so I have no firsthand experience on the visa process. My understanding and from what my colleagues have told me, the visa process is difficult because of what it takes to schedule the appointment, get ready for it, pay for the MRV, that is the visa application form that gives you the ability to book your dates, right? You're allowed anywhere from 3 to 4 booking times, one expedited option, and the ability to check for interview dates 3 times per day. I have faith that you all know what your reasonable capacity is, but my colleagues suggested to me that if you're going to start the process, you probably want to book interview times for the following year, right? Especially because I know there are also some parts of the visa process, my understanding is that you have to show your bank statement. There's specific questions you'll be asked, like where are you going? What's the name of the program? Will you be coming back to the country, et cetera, et cetera. As my colleagues would explain to me, sometimes people will not pass their interview for whatever reason. If the officer that is interviewing you at the time just decides not to, that's a possibility, and you might have to reapply again, right? There is, as far as I understand, a WhatsApp group for this kind of thing. It's kind of a WhatsApp support group for the F1 visa process. I'm gonna, as soon as I figure out the name of it, I'll pass it along to Oyinda. That way you all can have that information if you need it. So we talked about before, during, and now we're talking about after. So in the after, you have done everything that you need to do. You put together your application, you talk to your recommenders, you put together your writing sample, you wrote an amazing statement of purpose, you have all this information put together, you applied for the program said yes. And now we are talking about campus visits, negotiations, and meetings. So your biggest decision. Now you've done everything. You've made your list, you've gathered your materials, and now we wait. As Philip B. Williams says, submit it and forget it. If you're applying in the fall or winter, by spring inching towards summer, you will hear back if you've been accepted, rejected, or waitlisted, right? If you're waitlisted for a program, depending on how long the waitlist is or how far down you are on the waitlist, you still have a good chance of getting into a program. I know I know a poet who reached out to me who was waitlisted for UW-Madison. I think she was like second in line for the program. And then she got in, which is like amazing, right? Considering how many hundreds of people apply every year. So if you're waitlisted, I know it's not like the best news, but keep hope alive, keep the faith going, and check in periodically with your program if they give you the option to. So seeing campus. So we got into our dream program. Hopefully we got into several dream programs, and now we have options. Now you should start getting emails and calls from schools. You get the big envelope in the mail, right? Now we talk about what's called Welcome Week, in which the school makes arrangements for you to come and visit the campus, right? This is the week where the school will try to impress you, show you around, and entice you to pick them. Your school should offer you a small travel stipend to come visit. And in my personal opinion, I think it's a bad sign if a program does not even offer it. But I understand not every program is like my program in which they can offer that kind of thing. But if they don't offer, ask. It's totally fun to ask. But the thing is that the stipend will always be small, right? And I know because many of you will be coming from another country, I don't know if programs have the capacity to cover, for example, a flight ticket. I think it's always good to ask the program director and then maybe ask whoever is above the program director if there's anything that they can do to help, right? Or if you have to do a GoFundMe or crowdfund, ask the program director to pass around the link so that way people can chip in and help cover your flight if that's something that you need. So you have a chance now to meet your prospective cohort ahead of you and ask them questions. So what I mean is that when you go to visit a campus, you'll probably meet the folks who are in the program the year or two before you. And it's really important to take the opportunity to ask them as many questions. So here are the following questions you might want to consider asking your peers when you make your campus visit. What is the teaching load like? What is your relationship with the professors? Do you feel you get a lot out of did you feel you got a lot out of your thesis committee? And this is important to me. It might not be important to you. Where's the food at? What is the diversity actually like on campus? So I say that because one time when I was accepted to a program, I asked them, what is the diversity like? Which is my way of saying, if I'm the only Black person in this program, I'm not coming. Absolutely not. So I asked them, what's the diversity like? And they said to me, oh, we have people of all different kinds of ages, from different kinds of, educational backgrounds. But they did everything, but it confessed to me that they have no people of color in the program. For some folks, that might not be an issue. Speaking only from my personal experience, it was an issue because it is really hard to be in a program when you don't have anyone whose face looks like yours. It could feel very isolating. Is the program really fully funded? If so, how long does it take to receive the first check? So again, because of my fraught experience with my first MFA, I've made a point to just ask directly. Now, when you say fully funded, am I actually going to get my money? Or are you just kind of playing in my face, right? Most programs that do say that they're fully funded will be able to will have no problem giving you your first check ahead of the first semester because you're moving, you have expenses to consider, the fridge has to be full. So most programs that do claim to be fully funded will pay you promptly. Some programs have the option that the first check usually takes a long time to process because they're processing your information. So at least in my program, for example, we had the option to file a form to get 30% of our first check, right? So we would get a partial reimbursement, and then later, probably 3 to 4 weeks later, we would get the rest of our first check, right? Which neighborhoods are best to live in? Is transportation reliable? Should I get a car or bike, etc.? And the last question is, what is the community really like in the department? Do people hang out with each other? This question might not be of use to you, right? You might not be interested in hanging out with your cohort. That's your business, not mine. But for some folks, that might really be an important question, right? Would you be able to foster professional and personal relationships with folks, not only in workshop, but also outside of the classroom? You'll have, or you should have, a chance to meet with the faculty one-on-one, and these are some of the questions you might want to ask them. Will the core faculty be around for the duration of my time in this program? Is anyone expected to retire or take a leave of absence? So sometimes professors will take a sabbatical, right, to finish their own projects. And you don't want to, of course, be hoping to work with someone and the next semester they're just gone, right? So it's always good to just ask directly, will the core faculty be around for my thesis, right? Does the department offer travel reimbursement for conferences and other professional engagements? This, I think, is really important to ask, right? Because especially if you want to travel for conferences or other things like that, you are considered an ambassador of the program. And as such, the program should offer some way to compensate you in some capacity for your ability to travel, right? Even if you have to pay out of pocket, the program should offer you the option to get reimbursed at a later time. Most programs for conferences do not offer a per diem. A per diem is a little bit of money they offer every day, so that way you can get lunch during the conference or something, right? Because some people in the past have abused per diems, and as a result, most programs no longer offer them, which is a shame. But it is what it is. Will I be given the option to choose my thesis committee? I know this seems like a given, but in my first program, I was not given the option to choose my thesis committee. And I really, I found myself really frustrated with not having the option to do that. So ask directly, do you have the option to choose your thesis committee? And then again, ask about how funding is allocated, right? This is something also that's really important too, right? Is there any kind of summer funding offered? I don't know how every program is, but at least at my program, that we did get summer funding, right? I don't think we got our full funding during the summer, but it was enough to live off of for the 3 months we were not teaching. And I think it's really important to make sure that you have some kind of summer funding secured, especially because most programs will not allow you to work outside of the program and also be in it, right? And when I say, does the department offer awards, usually every semester, the departments, depending on how the program works, they will offer the option for you to apply for awards, right? Anything from like $1,000, $2,000, etc., right? And I think it's really important to know that you have those options if you so choose to apply for them. While you don't have to ask these questions exactly, I think it's important for you to ask probing questions in order to gauge whether or not this school is right for you. And sometimes you need to negotiate to get more money from schools if you have multiple offers. So for example, I was accepted to Butler University my very first time applying for MFAs, right? And they did not offer me a lot of money. So I emailed them and I said, hey, I need more money. Like I just said it very frankly. I was like, listen, I have a lot of programs that that I've been accepted to, but I want to come here. My issue is that there's not enough money that's being offered. Can anything be done? And then the next day they found an extra $1,000 for me to have, which I thought was really cool. So if there's ever a time for you to advocate for yourself, ask for what you need, you are the prize now, right? Now that you have been an accepted candidate, get your money, get what you need. You know what I mean? So here are my final thoughts as we wrap up. There is often this sort of public discourse about how people are treated who have an MFA and who don't. I have never prescribed to that personally. I have always been a writer with or without a degree. And a degree does not make someone a writer. A degree, however, will uniquely position you to have more professional development, financial stability, space and time to write, academic rigor, right? All those things are great, and all of those things are important and will shape you out as a writer, but they are not things that make you a writer. You make yourself a writer, right? The MFA is a long-term commitment. I don't think it's something that should be done lightly. So I think it's always good to ask questions and talk to folks before you begin your process. So, finally, having an MFA does not and has never ever validated you as a writer. And last but not least, I really want all of you to succeed. I think it's really important that all of you get into the programs of your dreams. And finally, I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for every single one of you that's here. So good luck and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Itiola. Do you want me to ask the questions now?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, 1 second. So I'm going to start with the questions that were posted in the chat and then go to the Q&A. And then I have a few questions I drafted down that I guess some people may not know to ask, but I think would be valuable for them to know. So I'll start with the question in the chat. This is from Sharon. She said, what if we have no editing, publishing, or teaching experience to add to our CV?
No editing, no publishing, or teaching experience to add to your CV. I think in that case, community service work might be of use in that regard. Like I said, I know that many of you are not coming from a literary background, right? But you do still have unique experiences that are transferable, and can still make you stand out as a candidate. So I would highly encourage you, any and all community service that you've done, um, that has benefited others in any capacity, can be something you can use to add your resume.
Yeah, yeah. And thanks for sharing that. But I think one thing I'd like to add is also this should speak to your proactiveness in pursuing opportunities that align with the career goals or academic goals you want to accomplish. Don't wait until an opportunity comes to you. Reach out to people. Itiola, you have an intern. Reach out to people to ask if you can shadow under them or be their intern. Reach out to organizations to ask if you can support with their communications or help edit something. So go out there and do some of the work yourself, and even build communities within your schools, within your friend groups, and add that to your resume to kind of beef it up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the second question she asked is, I heard about reaching out to professors in the department to establish a relationship before sending an application. Is that important?
Yeah, absolutely. That's extremely important. I usually try to build a rapport with professors that I want to be close to before I ever ask them for anything. Not that you have to do the same thing. That's just the way I am. I hate going to people and be like, I know you don't know me, but I need something from you. Like it feels a bit icky. But I think it's also just really important because if you want someone to write a letter of recommendation for you, they need to know who you are as a person first, and then who you are as a professional. That way, the letter of recommendation feels earnest, right? Because you're asking someone to advocate for your good nature and your ability to perform as a professional. So it's always really important, not just for the letter recommendation, but just for your long-term success as a writer, to build those professional relationships authentically. You just go up to people and be like, "Hi, I think you're great. Can we like build a professional relationship?" I go up to people all the time and just say, "Hey, can we be friends?" I know that's like a lot for some people. It's like a lot to do, but when you want to build a professional relationship, maybe just start out with like, what are you reading? What's your literature? What's your focus? And then allow the relationship to kind of develop from there.
Yeah. To extend that question a bit, I think the way Sharon may also have interpreted or meant the question is the professors at the university you're interested in. Okay. All right. Let me go to the questions in the Q&A parts. Someone asked, when writing the statement of purpose, must the writing project mentioned in the statement of purpose also be the same with the writing sample?
Yes. Yeah, I would say so because you don't want to confuse your committee, right? I mean, if you want to give them an idea of the kind of writing you want to do while you're in the program, that's fine. But when in the final paragraph, you can maybe do it sooner if you want. Mention in my following writing sample statement, the poems will be about this, right? And there's a way in which you want to kind of transition from talking about poetry to talking about your poetry to talking about what your writing sample will entail, right? And then going into having a writing sample that shows your range as a writer.
Awesome. And the next question, can we write a personal story in the statement of purpose to explain our creative process and outlook?
So yes, a part of your statement of purpose will be your personal story, right? That's a part of the reason why I didn't put my statement of purpose in the lecture, because it's not going to be of use to you all. It's good to see what a good statement of purpose looks like, but because my story is not your story, it's going to be different. But you want to make sure that your personal story is woven into your philosophies around writing, right? There has to be a way in which you do talk about yourself and your lived experience, but then talk about how your lived experience informs the kind of writer that you are, right? And I think those two together are really important. Otherwise, it's going to read like a short story, which is fine, but a short story isn't a statement of purpose, you understand?
One thing that you said, I love how your lived experience informs the kind of writer that you are. You mentioned a lot of great quotes, and in mind, it's like quotes where. The next question, I would like to know if the TOEFL test is needed for the MFA program.
Oh my God, I think it is. Oh, I hate that fucking test. Oh my God, that really and like, yeah, sorry. I always forget about the test because it makes me so angry because
Yeah.
it's so insulting. Like, but yeah, I do think most programs do require it, but it's not the program itself though, it's the English department.
Yeah.
Well, they want proof that you can speak English even though you're writing in English, which is so like asinine. But I
Yeah.
think though that there is a way for you to circumvent the test if you ask. I've heard of my colleagues asking the department, like, can I like do something else to prove my English proficiency? But my understanding is that they will require you to do the TOEFL unless you talk to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I took the TOEFL test when I came to the United States. I also had to write SAT for my undergraduate admissions process. It's not, if you prepare well, let me put it that way. If you prepare well and study well, it's not too difficult. And especially since in Nigeria, most of what we have taught is in English language. We go to schools in English language. It's almost pretty easy. So don't be scared of it if you have to take it. But you also check the school's websites because some schools don't require it. So check the school's website to see what they require for international students.
I think my
Oh,
parents went through that really obnoxious because I have a lot of personal grievances with it, but that's just my personal grievances.
yeah. Is it necessary to mention alumni in the department if one is, well, wait 1 second. Is it necessary to mention alumni in the department one is applying to in the statement of purpose? So let me read that again. Is it necessary to mention alumni in the department one is applying to in the statement of purpose?
It's not required, but I think it helps tremendously because in my statement of purpose to Wisconsin, I mentioned my colleague Chris Greggs by name because he was the one who told me to apply for the program. And I think because some programs do ask their alumni to not like scout people, but they'll tell people like anyone that you know, I tell them to apply. I think mentioning someone by name, I think does make a difference, but it's not required. You don't have to do it.
So, and I know in some applications, they will give like a spot for you to fill in the names of people that referred you to the program or something. So that's another place to put it in. Next question. What if the bulk of your work experience consists of non-literary work? Should you include them in your CV?
Yes, I would still include in your CV. I think the trick though is that you have to kind of demonstrate how the non-literary experience is transferable to this program. So for example, in my colleague's statement of purpose, they mentioned how they were a biochem engineer and how they made the jump to poetry, right? But they explained how their biochemistry experience eventually brought them to a place where they now needed but maybe also they were in a space now where they were ready to be a writer, right? Like there was a way in which their biochemistry experience brought them a kind of intimacy into the human condition, but now they needed a more intimate entry, which is where the writing comes in, right? So I think in your CV, there should be some way that you mention, these are my experiences. They're not explicitly literary, but the reason why they make me a viable candidate is because of these 4 reasons, for example.
Awesome. You know this saying, well, it's not what you do, it's how you talk about what you do that matters. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind. We've already answered this question. Then Rosaline asked, when you do get an admission into an MFA program and you're experiencing any form of delay, is it possible or even wise to ask to defer your admission? Is it also possible to ask to resume in the winter for a program that was stated for the fall?
No, I don't know a single program that would allow someone to do that. I mean,
Actually,
I
I
imagine.
did that.
Oh, really? Did you? Wow.
Yeah,
Tell me
yeah.
about that, because that's not my experience. I've never known most programs that I've known will not let you. They'll make you reapply. But tell me about how you were able to defer. That's great.
Yeah. So I had like several things that were hindering me from starting that fall. I just started a new job. The finances wasn't adding up for the gap. And so I reached out to the department lead, and I was already in contact with her before, well, right from the admission, just keeping in touch with her and asking her questions, asking her to connect me with current students of the program. So when I got to that point of accepting or declining, I told her that, hey, I would love to accept, but I have a lot of things that will prevent me from succeeding well in the first semester if I commit now, and I would love to defer my admission. Now, some programs, they don't allow you to defer because their program calendar is like already fixed. They know the classes you take in the fall, they know the classes you take in the spring. But programs that are very flexible, where you can take pretty much any course when you want, so far it fits into the program structure or the degree structure, they will be flexible. So reach out to ask. The worst thing they will say is no, and then you have to figure out your way from there. But some schools also give up to a year deference. That goes back to our conversation about what was that fee that I said? Acceptance fee. You just have to pay. Some schools will require you to pay an acceptance fee just to guarantee that you're not wasting their time or holding that spot away from someone else, just to show that you'll come to the program.
Yeah. And I also want to piggyback off of that. To what you said, that's beautiful. That's amazing. I also want to say that, like, I know that I'm giving you all a lot of information, but I hope you all know that I'm learning from you all as much as you are all learning from me, which I think is really a true blessing. Most programs, because they've accepted you, they are really excited about you. So most programs will do a lot to help you out if you find yourself in a position where you either have to defer, or like you can't figure out your plane ticket situation, or even maybe getting your visa together is difficult. If you ask, most programs will help you out because they want you to come, and that means helping you with whatever will hinder you from getting into the program. So again, I can't say this enough. Please ask for what you need. Please ask for what you need. Please ask for what you need.
Thank you. Ianolu has said, as an African, should I apply to a school that all the faculty members are people of color? And then she puts white in parentheses, he or she, and none of them is doing anything related to what I pursue, what I want to pursue. Sorry.
Having professors of color really makes a difference. In my first program, I didn't have any professors of color, and it was fine. But then in my second program, I had a lot of professors of color, and wow, what a difference it made. But the thing is that it's really hard because most programs do not they'll have like maybe 2 professors of color at most, if you're lucky. We'll say the half of the question.
Let me read it again for you. So as an African, should I apply to a school that all the faculty members are people of color and none of them is doing anything related to what I want to pursue?
So I think it is beneficial to have professors who are doing things a bit differently than what you're pursuing, but not so dissimilar from you, I think, because if you feel like a disconnect between what you're doing and pursuing and what the program has to offer you, it kind of is like, what are you getting out of it? The advice that I was given is that you want to pick professors who are doing things a little dissimilar from you, right? But also are still knowledgeable and have a sense of understanding of the kind of thesis you're putting together, right? So that way their differences can make up for maybe a knowledge base that you don't have, right? But it's good to have professors who are uniquely qualified to understand what you're doing and what you're trying to write about. So I would say different, but not too different, if that makes sense.
And Emmanuel asked, did you ever encounter a situation where a professor did not want to help you despite your efforts?
Yes. How honest should I be? We are in public.
Be honest.
Okay. I had a professor who tried to bully me into dropping a class because she hated me. It was really bad, y'all. Damn, I should have fought her back though. By the time I was like, I didn't know any better and I was scared. I think if you have a professor that you have a lot of tension with, I think it's always really good to document everything first, because I hate to say it, and it sounds so terrible, especially when it comes to professor, it will devolve into a he said, she said, and without evidence, like people are going to often take the professor's side. So it's really good to have documents of things. And if you have to go to the department chair to say, hey, just in case anything happens, I'm not having a good time with this professor, And I just want to mention it now. That way, if anything happens, I have record proof that I put in a formal complaint with that professor. And if you can avoid that professor, please do. But in professional settings, you ain't gotta like everybody. You just get what you need and go. But if you find yourself in that position, try to find common ground with that professor. It's always better to resolve it internally before it has to escalate to go into a department chair filing a formal complaint. But the most important thing is that protect yourself first. You are obligated to protect no one first except yourself. So.
Okay. Someone asked, how do you make a good choice of schools to select?
Oh, damn, we covered this in part one. A good choice of schools to select. Funding, location of the program, the coursework, the teaching load. What else?
Diversity.
Diversity, yes, and also the history of the alumni too. I think the history of the alumni, I think, is really important. You want to go to a program where it looks as though most of the alumni do fairly well for themselves after they graduate, right? If you have a program that's fully funded, but then like everyone stops writing after they graduate, that's not explicitly the program's fault, but it is a cause for concern, right? So those are things to consider when you're applying for a program. Yeah.
And one more thing I'll add is the timeline of the program. Some MFA programs are 2 years, some are 3 years. Mine is 2 years, but I have friends that are doing 3 years. I couldn't commit again after completing 4 years, 4.5 years of undergraduate. I couldn't sit somewhere else for like 3 more years. So the timeline of the program matters a lot, depending on other goals that you're seeking to accomplish career-wise or postgraduate level.
Oh,
okay.
I wanted to say that.
Yeah, great.
Mississippi at Oxford is a 3-year program. And I was accepted to that program, but I ended up declining only because Madison was my dream school. In my case, it's a 2-year program with the option for a 3rd-year fellowship, but it's not a full year. It's only like 9 months. And they give you a stipend. You teach a 1-to-1 course load, and you have no classes. So I also know the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, it has a similar thing. They're changing their 3rd-year fellowship to be a bit more competitive than it's been in the past. So it really depends on what you need, right? Do you need that extra 3rd year? I think 3 years is a lot for the program, if I'm being honest. Like 2 years, like I've been here for a long time. Let me go on with my life. That's just me though.
Yeah. Some of the details in the school's website are only on the surface. What is the best way to go about reflecting activities? I don't know what that means. That shows we really made our research aside in our SOP. So I guess this person is asking that the school website doesn't provide as much detail as they'll need to write important content for their SOP. What other way can they go about finding information about the school?
Just email and ask. I think it's good to ask maybe the department chair or whoever usually is maybe on a thesis committee. What is a course load in a semester? What does it look like? Do you all have a pedagogy class? A pedagogy class is for folks who are training to be teachers. Pedagogy class preps you for being a teacher at the university level, which I think is just really invaluable, whether you've been teaching as long as I have or whether you've only been teaching for like a few weeks. What other things are good to ask? The teaching course load, the semester course load. Oh, how many students you probably have in a class? I have like 15 students in my class, which is fine for an undergrad class that you're teaching. What else? Ask also what kinds of poetics do teachers teach? I think it's really important to know kind of, will they have a range of different kinds of poems and essays and things and assignments? So if you can kind of get an idea of what a poetry workshop would be like, if you want to ask in an email, that's always perfectly fine to ask.
Thank you. And just to add, you can do, if you're interested in finding more information about the school, you can do informational interviews with current students. Look on LinkedIn most people at the schools they go to on LinkedIn. So you can search for MFA students at, let's say, University of Madison, for example, and see the students that come up. And if you see anyone that particularly relates well with you, feel free to reach out to them to ask them if they'll be interested in sitting down with you via Zoom for 15 to 20 minutes where you ask them questions about their experience in the program. In addition, to increase application rates, many schools offer information sessions once the program application opens. So just make sure you go to the school's website or reach out to the department to ask, hey, are you going to host any information session about the MFA program? If so, when? And that's a great time to ask questions live and also just hear more content about the program that's not put on the website. Can one mention other creative work one does in the SOP, for instance, photography, design, fashion, etc.?
Yeah. As long as in your statement of purpose, you show how that is considered a transferable skill. In my MFA, we had the philosophy was that when you did your electives, it was really important for you to pick electives that were not necessarily writing related, because having a sort of wide range of interests as a person will better enrich the poems themselves, right? So with that, you can say that your experiences as a photographer in fashion, how those things, so you can say, for example, like the texture of the fabric informed the texture of the writing. That's corny, but the point is that you want to show that how those other entryways into art have informed the kind of writer that you are.
Yeah. Just to be respectful of your time, how much longer can you go? Can you go for like 15 more minutes or like?
Questions. I'm going to turn off my phone as soon as we're done here.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Because the questions keep coming in, but I'm going to put the hard stop after a certain amount of time. So how do we sort accommodations when we get accepted?
How do you sort out accommodations?
Yes, living on campus or anywhere else.
Oh yeah, you want to do that before you get to campus though. And I think like different programs have different ways to do that, especially if you're coming from a different country and maybe for whatever reason you couldn't figure out your accommodations while you were in another country. I don't know how every school is, but some schools might offer a place to put you in for a few days as you kind of figure that out. What my program did is two things. They had like a kind of like hotel where they can put students who are like staying for like a few days up to a week, and they often put you in touch with outgoing students who are gonna like who are gonna be ending their lease, right? And then if they have maybe a one bedroom or if you are in looking for roommates, they usually will put you in contact with alumni so that way you can take advantage of that apartment. I will say though, for many of my peers who were coming from Nigeria or India, different parts of the world, they had roommates largely because it's cheaper, but also because I think coming from another country, it might be a little harder to live alone at first. This is obviously a case by case basis, but I think it might be worth considering both options. What would living alone look like in terms of expenses? What would maybe having a roommate or two look like in terms of expenses? So I would say consider both options before you maybe sign anything.
What's the minimum number of schools to apply for? It's interesting because we had like a conversation about this yesterday before the event.
I would love for you to talk about your experience, and I can talk about mine. When I applied for both programs both times, I only applied to 4 because I only had the stamina for 4. I know colleagues who have applied for like 15 programs, which is amazing and scary to me because I do not have that kind of stamina. I would definitely say cast your net wide. Apply for as many programs as you can, but don't apply for programs just to apply to them. Apply to programs that you are actually excited about, that you would very likely go to if they said yes to you. So have a concise and specific list, right? And I think you should only apply to programs that you are enthusiastic about.
Yeah. And I'll share my own experience a bit. So the year before I finished my undergraduate degree, I started applying to MFAs. It was technically the second to the last semester. That was around September to December of that year. And I applied to 10 schools that year. I got 9 rejections. And the only one school that accepted me didn't give me any financial aid. They were kind of encouraging me to go and take loans, over $65,000 in loans. All my mentors said, no, you're not taking out any loans, reject the school's admission. It sucked a lot. And one of the advice that one of my mentors gave that really helped was to go and work for 1 year while trying to reapply. Now, when I got a job, I moved to a different city. So the conditions that shaped my school research changed in terms of now I had to find a school within the location where I live and where I work. I also had to find a school that accommodated my work schedule because I can't have classes during the day. I wanted a school that offered classes in the evening from like 6 to 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. I also wanted a school that I can easily commute to because I can't be driving 1 hour or 2 hours or taking the train 1 or 2 hours to class after work. So these conditions really defined the number of schools I could apply to, and only 5 schools fit within all these conditions. When I applied to 5 schools that year, the year after I started working, I got admissions to 4 of the schools. One school, I was close to getting a full ride. I was in the interview process, but I turned them down because I had gotten admission to the school that I wanted with at least 85% scholarship, which is American University. And so I was like, but, I should mention, before turning down the full ride scholarship, I used it to kind of negotiate my scholarship offer at American University, my financial aid offer at American University. So if you have more schools that you get admitted to and competitive offers, you can use it as a leverage to get more funding if you can. Now, there is no minimum of number of schools that you can apply to. It's up to you, but also know that numbers don't mean anything. They don't guarantee you getting an admission. Some people will apply to one school and they will get in, one school rather, and they will get in. Some will apply to 10, like myself, and get rejected from 9 the first time. So it's not just the number of schools, it's also the factors that help you define which schools are the bright fit for you, and also your application materials that will guarantee like you getting in. Okay, the last question here. I joined in when you're talking about how to mention in your statements that you don't want to teach during the program. Can you take this again? Did you mention that?
Oh, sorry, what was the question again?
So the person said, how do you mention in your statement of purpose that you don't want to teach during your program?
Oh, don't tell them that. Wait, hold on.
I was going to say, like, when did you mention that? I didn't hear that, but yeah.
Every MFA is going to require you to teach in some capacity. So you can't, sorry, this is my fault. I mean, I knew that I was going to teach in the program. I didn't have an issue with that, right? Everyone who gets accepted to an MFA is going to have to teach in some capacity, whether it's a 1-to-1 load or a 2-to-2 load. I hope to God that no one has to do a 3-3 load as a graduate student. That's absurd. But you don't have to like the teaching, but don't tell them that. Like, don't tell them that, whatever you do. What I will say though is that I think that there is a great value in teaching, even if it's something you're not necessarily interested in, right? Especially if you are not someone who is used to speaking in front of large crowds. I think that speaking in front of large crowds, learning to be punctual, having other people be accountable for you doing your work, I think those are extremely invaluable skills to have, whether or not you want to teach, right? But I think maybe in lieu of saying I don't want to teach you your statement of purpose, say that I have a curiosity to teach because these are the things that I know that teaching will offer me, which I know will be transferable in other skills, right? It'll say that teaching will offer you a unique experience that will make you a more rounded out individual. Be honest, but not too honest. Tell the truth, but don't, be honest, but yeah.
I'm going to add to what you say. It's very interesting that I'm having a unique experience in my own program because my program is somewhat very non-traditional in MFA. I am not teaching. However, I didn't write in my essay to say I didn't want to teach. When I got my admission, I told the director that, I'm interested in taking all the other classes, but I am not interested in teaching. And then my program is flexible enough that you can take other courses besides to fulfill the requirements for teaching. So it also depends on the program. I will say for your statement of purpose, focus more on what you want to do and what you can do with the support of the program than what you don't want to do. You don't have to lie that you're very interested in teaching, so that when you get in, they won't say, oh, in your statement of purpose, you said this, that. And also, if you're unsure of what strict rules that the program has, reach out to them to ask. For example, my own program, when I came in, I told them I was going to do like cross genre studies, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to focus on poetry or fiction or nonfiction, and I could write all. However, the experiences of my first 2 semesters guided me to realize, okay, I think I may be working best towards a poetry thesis. So some programs in the application will say you must choose one genre, or the genre you start with is, or the genre you apply to is the genre you must do in the program. Some programs are flexible, which is why I'm emphasizing that as much as we can give you all this information here, it's up to you to then do your research on the school's website, reach out to them, participate in information sessions, ask them questions to know the specifics per school, because it differs per school and also per location. Are you up for a few more questions for about 5 minutes?
I wanted to actually answer these 2 questions that we didn't get to. Someone said, I'd like to know why Madison was my dream program.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The funding is very generous, to be honest about that. The campus is gorgeous. Oh my gosh, I've never seen such a beautiful campus in my life. All of the teachers were very even. And what I mean by that is that we had an even number of teachers of color, as well as, white teachers, which I really liked, because I had never been, up until that point in a graduate setting, I had never seen so many teachers of color. And that was really exciting for me and really beautiful. And I felt very seen and taken care of in ways that I hadn't previously in my academic experience. Also, because I had one professor who I was just very frank about when I was coming into my program. I had a lot of trauma around being in an academic setting. And during my visiting week, I was very frank about that. I said, I can't go through what I've been through again. So do I have some kind of assurance that I'll be taken care of here? And the teacher said, yes, we will take care of you while you're here. And, the entire time I was there, they followed through on that promise. I was very challenged during that time, especially because one thing I loved about Madison is that even if you have one focus, which was poetry for me, they really encourage you to dabble in all different kinds of genre of writing. They never try to limit what your abilities are or what you can and can't do, right? They really want you to feel like a rounded out person. Oh, and another thing that I loved about my program is that they often and very regularly put us in meetings with literary agents and publishers and people who we can have professional rapport with after the program. I know that not every MFA does that, but I really found that to be profoundly invaluable. And also because my program does something that I don't think any other program does, which is have a seminar called Life After the MFA Seminar, where we strategize different options in terms of in job employment, teaching. I found it valuable, even though I knew I didn't want to teach after the program. And it really showed me that, if you're very savvy, the MFA can really take you a long way. It's transferable in marketing and advertising, editing and publishing, which is where I wanted to go to, because my long-term career goal is to eventually be a literary agent. And so the Life After the MFA brought in different kinds of folks who were from different focuses, who got their MFA, who used it for different things that are traditionally an MFA is not used for, which is outside of teaching. And also because the community is so close knit, even after you're done with the program and you graduate, what I loved is that teachers check in on you, which is great. I don't know, I'm sure other programs do this too, but even after you graduate, the care never stops. And I just felt really fortunate to have been so held close during my time there.
The next question. Okay, so I'm going to do the art stop around 1:30 my time, which is 12:30 your time. After the MFA program, is a teaching job certain? Perhaps I should say, is it competitive?
Oh, extremely competitive. Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot that goes into applying for a teaching job. is it certain? I mean, nothing in this life is guaranteed, not to be morbid about it, but what I will say though is that a good MFA will train you on how to go through the application and the job process. They will give you tips and tricks on how to make yourself the strongest candidate possible. So it is very competitive, but I think if it's really what you want, competition should not stop you from going after what you need. Oh yeah,
Yeah, one more. Let's do one more. And thanks for pushing through. Okay, do you have to research the literary magazine the school publishes and mention that you can be a valuable contributor?
not necessarily. I mean, you can kind of figure that out when you get there. If you want to contribute, you can just send them poems. But obviously, this is a case by case basis. It depends on whatever the program's requirements are. I know some programs really want to save literary magazines for the undergrads, and they sometimes ask maybe a graduate student to kind of be an advisor in some capacity instead of a teacher. That way, it feels more student run, right? But again, it really depends on the program. I think it never hurts to ask.
One question I have for you personally, looking back now, let's say 3 years ago, or like the year you were applying to MFA programs, and looking at where you are right now and the success of the publication of your book, do you think the whole experience was worth it? And if you could change one thing, what would be the one thing you change about it?
200%. Like yeah, 200%. I think if anything, so it's kind of funny how it all worked out. So my chapbook that came out after I graduated, I wrote during my MFA. And it's funny, my professor, Amy Kwan Berry, that I mentioned in my statement of purpose, she was the one who encouraged me to she said, like, in class, always have a project that never comes to work, so that you're working on the side, right? And I was just like, wow, that's amazing advice. And that's in part what encouraged me to continue finishing my chapbook. If I knew what I know now about the process, I wouldn't have done so much of it by myself, because I was so anxious about failing that I didn't really tell a lot of people that I was applying, and I shouldn't have done that. I should have let people support me. Even when I told my parents, I was so scared to tell them, because I didn't tell them I applied for any programs. And then I came to my parents and I said, I was like, Mommy, Papa, I got into this program. They were like, they're gonna pay you this much for poems? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the Midwest. Bye. Like, I wish that I had told them when I was applying and asked for their emotional support. Yeah. That's probably the only regret that I have. I mean, like, I had the time of my life in my program. I loved every minute of being there. I firmly say that I am the poet I am now because of how much the program poured into me and believed in my abilities.
Yeah. And thanks for emphasizing the importance of like telling a community or a group of people that you're close with. I think of my own experience, the year I got 9 rejections. If I didn't tell anybody and if I didn't have people to cheer me on, and even within the SprinNG community, because we're a community where we chat about things, and if I didn't tell anyone, I would have never had the courage or encouragement to try again the next year, or to even get the scholarships I got to be able to go to school. So it's important. Don't keep your dreams and also your fears to yourself. Tell someone about it. But yes, we're wrapping up. And first, I want to say I'm very grateful for your facilitation of this session. It has been super, super, super helpful. And I know I speak for all the attendees of this event and those that will watch the recorded session when I say they're going to go into this application period more informed and also more equipped. And this is the first time I'm saying something that's geared specifically towards African writers, especially because the pursuit of MFA in African countries, or even Nigeria to be more particular, isn't something that's thought very highly of. And so we're breaking those boundaries and breaking those barriers to information that people don't have to this very great opportunity and experience. I hope SprinNG can continue this. They're still in conversations of like future years, making this an annual thing before the application opens, to just share more insight about the MFA application process. But anyways, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody that attended. If you have any questions, contact us at SprinNG. Send an email to contact@spring.org and we'll respond to you as soon as possible. I'm going to post Itiola's website in the chat. Follow, oh, she already did. Awesome.
You can put the link. I actually put the wrong link.
Okay. I just posted the link right now. Follow Itiola on social media. She's doing a lot of amazing things, and learn more about our works, read our works, and support her as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and take care of yourself.